Hey there, and welcome back to the next video in this groundbreaking shift in the way we look at and treat anxiety. In the last video, we looked at how anxiety was different to regular survival fear, as anxiety was a non-essential fear based around the possible loss or change to our social acceptance, our self-worth, or our future prospects, and not any danger to our actual physical safety. We saw, though, that the brain does not see them as different and still instigates a fight or flight response with anxiety as it does with survival-based fears. We then went on to look at how, when anxiety is excessive and out of proportion to what is now considered normal, this anxiety response can lead to misinterpretations of symptoms, causing panic attacks and panic disorders. In this video then, we're going to look at what causes this over-the-top anxiety. If you stay right till the end then, you will learn today why traditional ideas of anxiety causes just don't make sense, how medication shows that we've been looking in the wrong place all the time, and what we need to be focusing on instead to get rid of anxiety forever. As we've already seen in the last video then, anxiety is traditionally a fear of things that don't really matter. A fear of things that hold little real consequence over our lives or of the lives of those around us. Anxiety disorder has always been considered a simple extension of this anxiety, whereby the sufferer starts to obsess over the smallest of details of the past or the future and come to believe that these details can have a massive impact on their lives. This means that the fight or flight response is triggered from the most trivial anxieties on a regular basis, and the person suffers through the symptoms of the fear response on that regular basis. The problem is, of course, that the fight or flight symptoms put the sufferer in an even more fearful state of mind, and so this builds on the already anxious mind, creating even more things to worry about. This is the anxiety cycle. If we take a look at the cycle, we can see that it's an uncomplicated loop of anxious thoughts creating physical fear symptoms, which then creates more anxious thoughts, and so on. This is how anxiety works and why it can be so crippling for so many people. The problem arises, of course, when we try to treat anxiety by breaking the cycle. Traditionally, anxiety has been considered a mental illness, and the anxiety cycle considered to be born of negative anxious thoughts. If we look at the anxiety cycle again, we can see the current thinking of how the cycle begins. There is usually some kind of external anxiety-inducing trauma or experience that kickstarts the anxious thoughts and starts the anxiety cycle turning. It then carries on all by itself, building momentum and anxiety as it goes. The problem with this theory is that nobody can ever really pinpoint the catalyst that gets the whole thing turning. Doctors and psychologists alike gloss over this point quite cleverly by telling you that it was probably something in your past that you don't remember. This is plausible, but ultimately unlikely. Of course, as anxiety is learned like all other fears, it could be simply down to anxiety sufferers learning to blow their anxieties out of proportion from their parents. This again will play some part for sure, but doesn't really explain how we've got to the stage where 40 million people in the US suffer from some form of anxiety disorder, and that number is rapidly growing. There are also many people who suffer from debilitating anxiety whose parents have no idea and no understanding of their condition whatsoever. Who could they have learned it from? One of the problems I had with this theory when I first started researching my own anxiety was that it was all a consequence of wrong thoughts. Now, while I realize that panic attacks and panic disorders are certainly created by misinterpretations and wrong thoughts, can we say the same about all of anxiety? Are anxiety disorders results of wrong thinking? Can the symptoms produced in anxiety's fight or flight response always be put down to wrong thinking? Sometimes we overplay the fears of embarrassment, loss of security, or loss of self-worth, that's for sure. I know that I have certainly been guilty of overthinking things in the past and building the tiniest problem into a full-blown fear. I have for sure. But is that the whole story? Is it really that simple? The problem is that there are also plenty of people, and I was one of them, that suffer from waves of constant anxious feelings which seem to have no bearing on negative thoughts at all, except to create them. There are people who never feel calm and can't remember the last time they could properly relax. Some people with anxiety disorders have changes in mood from hour to hour, whereas others can have good days and completely bad days. Now, these feelings and changes in mood could certainly be caused by the physical symptoms of the fight or flight response, but they often seem to be independent of the wrong thinking associated with the traditional causes of anxiety. At this point then, I think it's time to take another look at the anxiety cycle and look at it from a different viewpoint. As I said before, the traditional concept of anxiety being a solely mental illness had the root cause of the anxiety cycle beginning with the negative anxious thoughts. But this is wrong. The overall idea of the anxiety cycle is correct, but the initial catalyst that jump-starts the cycle has been in the wrong place all this time. The cycle doesn't start with anxious thoughts, but with the physical processes. It is the fight or flight symptoms that are the cause of the anxious thoughts and worries, and not the effect. This, of course, does not change the way anxiety works on a day-to-day basis, but it does drastically change the way anxiety is viewed as an illness. As the root cause is a physical process, anxiety can no longer be viewed solely as a mental illness. It also explains the millions of people who suffer from anxious feelings every day with no obvious trigger. It also radically affects the way we have to look at treating it. Or does it? One method of helping anxiety sufferers already in use today that tackles the physical processes and not the mental is medication. Medication does not change your thoughts or how you think. Most anxiety medications just change the physical processes in your body that affect your mood. Processes like how much neurotransmitter is absorbed by the body. SSRIs, for example, like Zoloft or Lexapro, change the amount of serotonin that is absorbed by the body. They can be very effective, but they do not change the way you think. Changing the amount of serotonin in your body changes your overall mood, not the way you are thinking. It is not a mental process at all, but is a solely physical and chemical process. It reduces the anxious thoughts and the worries by breaking the anxiety cycle at the symptom stage. SNRIs like Effexor or Cymbalta do a very similar thing with epinephrine. The problem with medication, of course, is that they only mask the symptoms themselves and break the cycle temporarily, never actually curing the anxiety. As soon as you stop the meds, the cycle begins all over again. This means that you need to be taking them for the rest of your life, which can be extremely expensive and of course can cause unwanted and sometimes severe long-term side effects. Do we really need medication though? Surely, if we can make anxiety easier through these medications and the physical processes that they affect, then shouldn't it be possible to make permanent changes to our body that can do something similar without having to take medication? After all, we have already seen how the major cause of the fight or flight response is just chemicals like adrenaline and cortisol, which are produced by our body. Then surely there is a way to change these natural processes, suppress the fight or flight response, and break the anxiety cycle forever without medication and with purely natural methods. Well, the good news is there is. And we are going to take a look at exactly that process and method in the next video. We'll also be taking a look at the exact root cause of the physical problems that trigger the anxiety cycle and set the ball rolling on how you can go about fixing the problem and breaking your own anxiety cycle forever. So watch out for that video tomorrow. It's going to have some really exciting stuff. I know you'll love it. So keep an eye out for that video and I will see you then. Take care. Have a great night. See you soon.